Hello everybody, my name is Manues and welcome to another Eternal Top Decks video series. Today I'm gonna bring you an update on Stonescar Jito. Basically since my last Stonescar Jito video, I learned quite a bunch more about the archetype and improved it further, and felt like it's time to share it with you guys, especially since it became more popular by now and there's still a lot of bad versions out there that I see, and I figured it's time to share my knowledge and insight that I gained since my last video of the archetype with you. Alright, so let's talk about the deck. So currently the 1-drops are still the same. It's all the 4-offs, Jito, Drone, Knifejack, Ronin and Pyroknight. Also for Argenport Instigator still. I am not a big fan of running Beetle still, simply because past a certain point, too many 1-drops have diminishing returns, especially if they are weaker than your other ones, and Beetle is kind of weak. There's a lot of things that your opponent can play that kind of invalidate Beetle, like Groundwatch Paladin and other 2/2s like Rakano Outlaw and stuff, and we don't always have a Torch, and we also don't always want to waste a Suffocate or say a Rapid Shot on such a small unit that otherwise our other 1-drops mostly can just attack into and offer a trade. Like we need stuff like Suffocate and Rapid Shot in order to deal with bigger units that otherwise would eat one of our attackers every turn, like Seraph and Sandstorm Titan and stuff like that. So we don't really want to waste them on small units. So that's basically why I'm not a big fan of Beetle, and I think the amount of 1-drops that we currently have is enough. I basically run like one Dark Return as like a 21th 1-drop or like a 25th kind of cheap unit, because it allows us to reuse one of our better 1-drops rather than play a worse one in Beetle, or just get back an Argenport Instigator, and also has the potential in long games to get back a Bandit Queen or Shadowlands Guide, which I will talk about in a moment. Currently I'm only on 2 Suffocate. I had more removal in the past. I just felt that I had too many draws where I flooded a bit too much on like non-unit cards, and that makes your queens and rallies worse, and basically just makes you incapable of winning because you need a lot of units early, and if you don't, you're just gonna like drag out the game too much and lose. It is possible that there still should be a third one, like the Dark Return could be a third Suffocate. That's kind of a close decision. Currently I chose to go with the Dark Return, but I couldn't fault anyone to run like a third Suffocate or one Annihilate instead, but I wouldn't run 4 removal anymore as I used to. Yeah, the spells here still for Rapid Shot, for Torch, doesn't need much explanation. They are super important for the deck to keep attacking and keep the board in check and just tempo out the opponent. 3-drops still for Assembly Line, and by now I'm running 4 Shadowlands Guide. I had Sanguas for a while. I'll talk about why I don't have them and don't like them anymore in a moment. And I also tried Champion of Chaos as like a way to develop board into cards like Lightning Storm. The problem with Champion that I had is that it is just the only card basically in the deck that is a really good removal target, be it Permafrost, be it Vanquish, and Vanquish is a really big deal with so much Rakano and Combre decks running around, and even some other decks that are Justice that play some Vanquishes. So Vanquish is everywhere. You just don't want cards in your deck that are bad against Vanquish if the entire rest of your deck is good against Vanquish and good against spot removal in general. So that's why I was pretty unhappy with Champion. And Shadowlands Guide is a perfect alternative, basically. It is, in the best case, a better assembly line if you have a Grenadin drone in play, because it's a 3/1 plus 2 1/1s rather than 3 1/1s. And even if not, the other units are also great to get back. Getting more Warcry from an Oni Ronin that you get back is great. getting a Pyroknight back in the mid game to ultimate it later down the road is great, or even in like a long grindy game, potentially getting an ultimated Pyroknight back to ultimate it again gives the deck some surprising staying power in reactive matchups. Like I've easily battled through multiple lightning storms or harsh rules in some matchups thanks to the Shadowlands guides, simply because if the opponent does not actually start building a board themselves and applies pressure and just tries to like work through our stuff, it becomes really hard when you add in stuff like Shadowlands guide and assembly line. And yeah, I'm also pretty sure that 4 is the right number. The card just felt great. Like one of the problems that I had with the deck is that it was a bit inconsistent in flooding the board and presenting a big board consistently by turn 3 or 4. And Shadowlands Guide is the only other card in the game that can help you manage that, and that is why it's so great, and that's why I tried it again as a 4-off, and I was super happy with it. It played great. It just really pushed the deck to another level. Which also brings me to Rally. I very much have to recant my prior evaluation and statement of Rally. The card is actually even better than Bandit Queen and should at least be a 3-off, most likely the 4-off that I'm running. The one reason why I could see it being a 3-off is that in a lot of situations and games, drawing 2 in the first couple of turns, like first 4 or 5 turns, can be pretty lackluster because the second is often kind of dead, either because the opponent is gonna be dead from the first, which is not that big of a deal if you have a second then if your opponent is dead anyway, but it also makes it a bit harder for the first one to be really good, because if that rally would be like another unit, the first rally would be better, and sometimes the second rally is also not going to be that good because you're going to lose so much board while attacking and trading with the first rally that the second rally doesn't have that many units to work with. But the card is just so flexible and powerful and makes the deck as good as it is that you kind of can afford to sometimes just have 2, even though the second one is going to be kind of bad, because it is a lot better most of the time to have 2 rather than 0. So that's why I'm still running 4, but I could see only running 3. But I've been really happy with 4, and changes like the Shadowlands guide and the 4 Shadowlands guide and the 4 rally are things that really push that deck to another level compared to before, and made me like really confident and happy about the deck and the deck list. As usual, still other 3-drop alternatives like Shogun Scepter are really bad. I think I explained that enough in my old video. Feel free to check that out if you want to learn more about some initial choices that I'm not going to discuss here again because I've already discussed them at length in the first video. And last but not least, we have Queen. I only run 3 Queen, and I think 3 is probably the maximum you want to run and can run, especially with 25 power. Like with the 4th Queen, I would be inclined to consider something like a Red Monument as like 26 power, simply because hitting 4 reasonably often with 25 power is far from a given and can be really tricky. There have been plenty of games where I had a Queen in my hand and never got the power to cast it. Sometimes you win anyway, which is fine, and it doesn't matter as much, but every time you actually want and need the Queen to like help you win the game, and you're sitting on 3 power, it is terrible. Which is why I think 3 is like the maximum you want. That gives you 1 as often as possible without giving you multiples too often, especially in situations where you don't have 4 power, and also with 3 you have a lower chance of having 1 without having 4 power. It's just like a card that can be really nice and is sometimes better than Rally, simply because it's a unit itself, and it is better to in situations where you have not as much board and your opponent is like constantly clearing your board and dealing with stuff, to have a Queen than a Rally. So Queen still has its merits, which is why it is there. But yeah, 3 is the maximum I would run by now. I've had way too many games where I just sat there with queen on like 2 or 3 power, and I'm never gonna like play that queen before it's too late to matter. So the deck is basically actually more of a rally deck than a queen deck. And also we have a virtual force queen with Dark Return for like longer, grindier games. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is Sangua. I initially was a pretty big fan of Sangua simply because of how impressive it looks. It's like a 4/2 for 0 power, which is a huge tempo swing. The problem is the 2 health makes it vulnerable to almost anything that our other units are vulnerable to as well. So it is basically mostly just like a 0 power 1-drop. It's basically like a 0 power Knifejack that instead of dealing you 2 damage, most of the time gains you like 4 health, which is nice. And the life gain can sometimes matter in like racing situations. It can sometimes mean that your opponent can't race you before you kill them. It buys you more time in standoff situations where like a Sandstorm Titan keeps pressuring you and you cannot alpha strike them yet, and waiting to draw into like a rapid short or a rally or a queen to alpha strike for the win. So having extra health there is really nice and buys you extra draw steps. But the problem is Sangua makes you play into cards that are good against the deck, especially Lightning Storm. It also has the problem of making your good draws better and your weak draws worse, which is usually not something you want. The deck has a lot of power already and its best draws are already so good that it doesn't need Sangua to win. Like your good draws just beat about anything in the game anyway, aside from an opponent that has 1 or multiple Lightning Storms at the right moment. So putting cards in a deck like this that make your nut draws better doesn't really make sense, because your nut draws already beat everything, so why put something in that makes them better, that at the same time makes you lose more games when your deck is not operating at full speed. So that's why I'm not the biggest fan of Sangua. The other problem with Sangua, once again, is that it is the only Vanquish target in the deck. While that's not that big of a deal, because you usually play Sangua on turn 2 or 3, and if our opponent spends his second or third turn killing our Sangua with Vanquish rather than developing their board, and while our Sangua cost us 0 power and their Vanquish cost them 2 power, that's still like a pretty good tempo gain and all, but it is even better if we can just deploy stuff and have them rot, have them have their Vanquish rotting in their hand, especially if they might not even have another play in that turn other than Vanquish. So instead of inefficiently trading with one of our cards, tempo-wise and card-wise 1 for 1, they will be in a position where they can't do anything at all, which is even better for us. The one reason why I could see playing like a small number of Sanguas, I think the maximum you could afford probably would be like 2, is because they're pretty nice with Shadowlands Guide. Like after you attack and hit them with 2 units, Shadowlands Guide can get back Lurking Sangua, because it's 0 power cost in your void as well. So you can just Shadowlands Guide on Sangua, which is a pretty powerful move. But once again, normally getting back one of your regular 1-drops is just fine as well. So it doesn't really need that, and just to make your good cards better doesn't seem that great to play a mediocre card like Sangua, since Guide is already great, which is why I don't run any Sanguas. And I also wouldn't really know what to cut. Like, you could cut a Dark Return for Sangua, but then where to get the slot for the second Sangua from? Like, do we want to go down to to 2 queens? Maybe, could be okay, but arguably I think that most likely Bandit Queen and Dark Return, or Bandit Queen and another removal, will do a whole lot more for the deck in a lot of situations than a random lurking Sangua would do, which is why I just run 0. I have been initially blinded by the awesome potential tempo swing the card provides until a friend convinced me that the card is mostly just win more and shouldn't be in the deck that plays this deck a ton. And I've talked and played with him quite a bunch, and yeah, he got me come around on Rally being way better than I think, and Sangua being way worse than I think, and helped me push me in the direction that got me to where the deck is now. So once again, sharing your thoughts and reasoning and opinions with other people really helps, even if you're experienced and good at games and know a lot. There's always something that other perspective and other smart people can potentially teach you and show you where your reasoning might seem right and reasonable but is off. You always have the potential to just be kind of like blinded and stuck in your own perspective, and it's always great to have other smart people to give you additional perspective on things to improve and evolve. So thanks for that. Shout out to Klaus Jöns for that. For anyone that knows him, he's like an old school MTG, GP and PT player from Germany that got into Eternal in the beta as well. Alright, so I think that should cover everything about the deck list. Once again, I can only state once again how I think Jito is still one of the best decks in the game, by far. It is one of my best performing decks of the decks that I track stats with. By far, I think I am at like 58 to 59% win over like 270 tracked games or something, and a bunch of that sample size is from like the verse versions. I think with this particular version only, the sample size might even be like 60 plus. But I have no separate trackings for various versions. I just basically tracked the deck constantly while I adjusted and evolved it further, so that might skew the stats a bit. But yeah, I still think the two best decks in the game right now on ladder and maybe even outside of ladder are Big Combre and Jito, and that's also basically what my win percentages relative to other decks reflect from my tracking with both decks. And it seems like people are slowly catching on. Jito became almost twice as popular lately as it used to be, and Big Combre also really moved up in popularity, and I think people start to realize how great both of these decks are, and I haven't had that impressive of a performance with any other deck yet, and no other deck also felt as good, as powerful, as consistent or whatever in the games that I played with. It's not only the results, it's also like how the deck feels when you play it. It just feels like a really good, really strong deck. If you played these games long enough and played so many decks, you develop a feel for how good a deck is. Like a deck that is really good and really strong and well positioned also kind of feels that way. So if you have basically data and that feel together, you have like a nice way to checking them against each other and have kind of confirmation or proof for one thing. Like if the deck only feels good but the stats don't line up and it's performing poorly, then your feeling might be off and you just might have like a wrong impression of the deck and it might be skewed by some factors. And if the stats are really good but the deck might not feel and perform as well, you might want to look at your sample size. If your sample size is not that big, maybe you're just running kind of well and are a bit lucky, and the sample size might normalize down the road. So it's always nice to have multiple factors to base your judgment on, and if they are not lining up with each other and are not coherent, you might want to check why that is and see where the problem is and which one of the two is more likely. So that's nice. Alright, I think enough rant on that general stuff. Time to get into some games. As usual, stay tuned for 3 game videos after this one to take the new version into battle. I just jumped up from like 119s to top 15-ish yesterday, just with jamming a bunch of Jito because I was done with wasting rank with random stuff that I was trying out, dropping to like below 200 at the worst point. I think it was like 200, I don't know, 14 or something at worst. And I just decided to go back to the decks that I know that are powerful and work. And as you can see, I skyrocketed back into top 15 easily. Currently am at 18s because I dropped from 14s to like 18s overnight without playing. So expect some more top 20 Jito play in a moment. Stay tuned.